Hello and welcome to another episode of Bare Bones Wargaming, a show with no bells, no whistles, no frills, just a man, a camera, and his game. Alright, as you can see, my current game continues to unfold here. I'm at the beginning of, where am I? June in 1916, and as you can see, there's lots of action over on the French right flank there. Just trying to see about the forts, capturing the forts, holding on to the forts, and such for the rest of the game. So, but no gameplay this time. This time, of course, naturally, if you watched last episode, you know that the focus here is once again Verdun, 1916 Steel Inferno by Fellowship of Simulations. And it's a game that, again, little spoiler, I have enjoyed, but we're going to break down the nuts and bolts of it here because, of course, since this is a review coming, you all know what time that means it is. Boom, 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 boom. Womp, womp, womp. Womp, womp, womp. Dun, 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 dun. Hoo, ha, he, ho. Dun, 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 dun. It's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly. Alright. So, as always, we'll start off with the good. Alright. First things first. Good. The map. I like the map. Not just the neoprene map, although I think the neoprene map is totally awesome. Not to sound like Jeff Spicoli here. But even the mounted map is nice. Excuse me, if you look down here at the map, you can see the pieces just kind of jump out. You can tell right away who's where. It's very easy to tell with the spaces. You know, where are the high ground? Where are the fortresses? The muse sticks out nicely. It's just a very nicely done map. I really like it. It's very functional. The boundary lines are, you know, it's kind of Goldilocks. They're not too dark. They're not too light. They're just right. That you can, again, like a bird's eye view, you could be like, boom, here's where the front line is. Here is where everything is at. So I really think the map is very nicely done. The cards. The cards are very nice too, especially the artwork. I mean, the artwork is just, it's mind-blowing. From even the artwork that's just like this plane of the German Air Force, but even more so, you know, the other more haunting images. That's from an early game card here from the French, and then this one later on from the Germans. I mean, it's just, whew, enough to send a shudder down your spine, in my humble opinion. So artwork on them is phenomenal. Even the pictures, I think the pictures are very well done too, of the different, you know, leaders. Mostly the pictures are of leaders and such. But I think they picked good photographs for those. So I think the cards are really, really well done. Not only the card decoration, but I also like, with the cards, I like the duration bit too. Okay, the red circles at the bottom that I talked about last time. You know, I like the fact that you can look at a card and see how long am I going to be able to have it in my deck. When will it be removed? You know, it just stands out very nicely. And it's a very clever idea too. I think as well. I mean, other games and stuff, you know, you have your ebb and flow and cards come and go and such, but, you know, to kind of be thinking about that and anticipating, you know, thinking, okay, I'm going to lose these cards next turn, etc., etc., that's very interesting to me, and I enjoy it. The tension, there's a lot of tension in this game, especially at the very beginning, when the Germans are making that initial run at Verdun. You know, can the French get there in time and block them enough? Or will the Germans be able to burst through and grab enough real estate and then just hold on to it? Okay. Sorry about that. Again, my allergies are just running wild already. Which also brings me to another thing that's good about this game is the flow. Now, some games where you have a situation where it's kind of lopsided at the beginning. You know, here the French were definitely not prepared for this. I mean, the Germans really caught them off guard with this. You know, similar to, and I mentioned this in my playthrough video, like Operation Barbarossa. But unlike Operation Barbarossa, if you're just playing a Barbarossa scenario where there's very few chances for the Russians to strike back, basically one side has got to take a beating, you know, be like the old Timex commercials, take a licking and keep on ticking. Here, the ebb and flow of this, you know, after the first 3-4 turns, the worm turns, so to speak, and, you know, the French start to get the upper hand. They have the stronger barrage cards, and they begin to strike back. Okay, as the German offensive, of course, did not achieve what it had intended to bleed the French army white. Next thing you know, it's bleeding the German Imperial Army white. So I do like that, because if you start the game as the French, and yeah, you're taking some blows, and most people don't like to be a punching bag, especially forever, it doesn't last forever. Okay, you are going to get your chance to strike back. You are going to get your chance to hit, and you will still get a chance even whenever the tide is against you, so to speak. But it will flip over, you know, and then you kind of have to recalibrate your thinking as each side too. So, you know, it's kind of that flexibility too, which I also like as well. Okay. I like the rotation rules in the game. I like the fact that, you know, if you've got exhausted units, like I've got over here right now, a couple of exhausted units down here. Right here, I've got a bunch of exhausted German units that, you know, by movement I can rotate them out and rotate them in. I think that's very clever. You don't necessarily have to spend 2 moves on it. But it's very much like, you know, the World War I kind of thing, where they would have rotated units out, both sides, on a regular basis. So I like that rule. I also like the 6 rule, as I call it, on the barrage dice. You know, when you roll a 6, you get to roll more dice. And I like it because it not only shows the unpredictability of how some of the barrages would work. You know, sometimes you'd lay down, you know, a whole fearsome curtain of fire and there'd be nothing living left. And then other times you'd lay it down, kind of like the experience of the U.S. Marines during World War II when attacking the Japanese-held islands. You know, you plastered that thing with enough firepower and ordnance, you're like, nothing could live there. And then it's like, surprise! Guess what? We're still here, so to speak. So I like the idea of the 6s, and also the fact that it's press your luck, because you can roll those 6s again, but again, if you get too many of them, you're going to cause friendly fire casualties. So I like that 6 rule. I think it's a very cool rule. The other thing I like is the difference in the combat between barrage and infantry assaults. Barrage being dice, you know, it is kind of a tricky business, and it was in reality too. Just as I said a moment ago, sometimes, you know, with your barrages, sometimes you set the world on fire, the next time you can't find a match. But the infantry assaults, because of the way things were, the defender having the advantage, were much more methodical, much more calculated. So, you know, like in the game, in the playthrough, the attacker, each fresh unit inflicts only 1 point, but if you got fresh defensive units, you inflict 3 points of damage, okay? Because clearly this war favored the defender for the majority of it. And I like that. I like the fact that it's not necessarily a uniform kind of combat. You know, it's not all dice rolling. It is kind of that calculation, that trying to plan ahead and hope that your barrage does the damage you think it's going to do. And then, of course, your troops can finish it off, so to speak. So I also like that as well, too. Another thing I like about the game a lot is what I like to call the card choosing option. You know, at the beginning of each month, you get to go through your deck and you get to choose a card, whichever card you want, out of your deck to put in your hand to play for that turn. Okay? And I think that's very cool because it helps to mitigate against luck. But also during the middle of the turn, if you're looking at your hand going, oh my gosh, I need some barrage cards, dude, I got too many events, or I need this event card, then you can discard 2 cards from your hand, search your draw pile, find what you're looking for, and then put it in your hand, and of course that's your turn. But just the fact that you, again, can do that, if you end up with some lousy cards, now it is going to cost you, which, you know, makes sense because nothing in life is free. But just the fact that you have that option, I think, is a very interesting and clever way of doing the design for the game. Deployment in this game is another good thing. It's very quick and easy to set up, since you don't have to worry about unit identifications and such. It's very easy to set everything up. Everybody's along the front line, one side of the muse. You know, the Germans have 3 units, the other side they have 2, and the French all have 1, and boom, set up your trenches, we're done. So setup is just a matter of minutes as far as deployment of forces go. Cards can take a little bit longer, except on the first turn, you don't even get to choose a card from the deck. You just basically have to play what you have in your hand, so to speak. Okay? Although the scenarios do give you specific cards to begin with. Okay. And again, like any good game, I think that has a card-driven system, you have to have a situation where there's just too many things you need to do and just not enough time, not enough action points to do it. And most of the time that'll happen. Sometimes I have had situations where you spend the action points and you do feel like, shoot, what am I going to do with this last one? But typically there is something that you need to do. Okay. Now the tough thing, of course, is the reinforcements, because it costs you victory points to bring those troops on, but you need them to raise your morale. So again, it kind of goes with that too much to do stuff. There's a lot of things here that are very double-edged sword, which of course, you know, in reality would be the same thing too. Lots of decisions, especially tough decisions, end up being, you know, that double-edged sword nature. So I do like that as well. I also like how this game gives you the feel of World War I without a whole lot of units, a whole lot of rules, just not a lot of the overhead that you find in some other World War I games. You still, you know, have that element of you lay down the artillery barrage, you launch your guys up out of the, you know, trenches over the top. And sometimes you break through and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you take a beating. Sometimes you get taken to the woodshed, you know. Those kind of things. But it does it and gives you that flow and that frustration without a whole lot of, for lack of a better way to put it, a whole lot of things to bog you down. And I like that about the game and about the system too. I also like the combo cards. Okay, cards that, like this one here, you know, in order to play it, you know, you got to go ahead and there is a requirement for it, and then it allows other things to happen. Now, some cards only have a requirement and such, but even ones like, you know, I've played Joffre, I'm pretty sure is how you pronounce his name, not 100% sure, but you need him if you want to be able to launch the Somme offensive, okay, which can be big in the game because that's one of the things that you can repeat to kind of help rack up some victory points as the French player. So I like the combo card idea too. You know, other games have triggers that allow other cards to be played, but in this game there's more of a chain reaction at times between the cards that kind of build on each other, that kind of reflect the ebb and flow of the battle. And the other thing I like that's in the good category is I like how the cards, they use them to incorporate things that are going on off the board, but definitely influence things. Like, you know, the Italian offensive that was launched to try and basically pull away, distract the enemy, pull resources away and such. Or like the Battle of Jutland, or the Brusilov offensive. All those things are factored in this game, and I do like that because it can affect the final outcome of things that are beyond your control, because, you know, there is only so much you can do. Now, some could argue that that increases the luck element, but again, lots of life is luck. There's lots of friction in wars, we all know. And, you know, that's just the way it is. But the nice thing about this game is that, you know, if the die rolls go against you sometimes, or the card combos do, this game's very easy to set up and play again, you know, and just start all over again. I like the representation of it, because sometimes I think some games try to live inside of a bubble without having outside influences, the larger war, if you will, influence what's going on the board. And I think that a lot of times is a disservice. So lots of good things here. I mean, if I'm totaling them up real quick, I've got what? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. I got 14 things listed in my good column. So very cool. Now for the bad. Now some of these bad things, I will preface this by saying that they are things that I pointed out that I see in the game, and I'm not a super expert on World War I. I know the basics. You know, I've read, like, you know, Martin Gilbert's 1-volume treatment. I've read The World Undone. I've read specific books like about Verdun, The Price of Glory and stuff, but I would not claim to be a World War I expert. So those of you who are better versed, in the First World War. Some of the things I'm mentioning here is bad. If you have answers or responses to them, by all means, please put it in the comments, because I would like, I always like to learn things. Every day that I learn at least one new thing to me is never a wasted day, because, again, I've added something to my knowledge base, something that helps me, understand and grasp the world better. So a few of these things, again, maybe more historical things that raise a little eyebrow based on my knowledge base. So just see where I'm coming from there. Okay. The first thing, though, doesn't fall into that category after all that little preamble there, and that's the rule book. There could be some improvements in organization and clarity. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, for example, one big thing that jumps out right away and jumped out at me even before I got the game, when I was seeing Charlie Vassey's thread on Board Game Geek, very quick feedback, on the first couple of games, was looking at the rule book. So here we have the rule book talking about the onboard tracks. Notice the rule section number, 12. Notice the page number. What is that? 25. In my humble opinion, if you're going to talk about the map, which they do talk about the map, let's see. Map actually is discussed on page. Let me just find it to prove my point here. The map is under section 3, and we're on page 7. If you're going to talk about the map, then talk about the map. All parts of the map. Not just where the battle's taking place, but, talk about those tracks that you have on each side. Okay, because one of the rules that was a little tricky to find, and I'm glad I did look at threads on Board Game Geek, was the whole thing about how to move up your reinforcements, how to get them into the game. And until you read that section 12, you're kind of like, okay, great. So I read section 9, which talks about how to use my action points, and it says about, you're going to move them, from en route to reserve. Well, great, but when do I do, you're going to bring them in? Well, from the en route box. Well, how do I get them to the reserve? When does that happen? And that actually is found under the tracks. So I think when you talk about the map, when you talk about what's going on and the different tracks in the game, I think that should be right up front. So I think that's one thing that, organizationally would be better. Some of the movement detail, because some of it's a little different than you find in other war games, I think there could have been a little more detail added. In particular, the Muse. Because the Muse, I posted a thread on Board Game Geek, and the designer answered me within 24 hours. So I will say kudos to the designer of this game. Walter, hang on. Vejdovsky, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He responded very quickly and clarified things. But I think in the rules, I think you just need to have a section about the Muse. And talk about what you can do, how you can move back and forth. I think that's very important, because the Muse is such a, it does affect movement so much. It takes away the bonus move. It doesn't affect supply lines, which kind of goes to my next point too, was about the supply detail. The supply rules are very simple and they're very straightforward, and that's cool. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but there should have been a little line in there that should have been like, hey, the Muse does not affect supply tracing. So, hey, if you can trace through friendly spaces across the Muse, then terrific. You're in good shape. Okay, but that doesn't exist because somebody asked that question on Board Game Geek. And I responded, and the designer confirmed that, yeah, you don't need to, because when I looked at the supply rules, I'm like, well, it doesn't say that you can't. But, of course, we all know what happens when we assume. So it was nice to have the designer confirm what I responded to that person there. Okay, so that's the big thing that, and my understanding is, and I could be wrong about this, but I think this is, brand new company, they're starting out and stuff, so you could say this bad one kind of falls into the category of constructive criticism, as far as that goes. Now, a couple of historical things here that kind of struck me about the game and I put in the bad category was the air superiority. I don't know a whole lot about the air war during World War I. I mean, usually if you were to ask me to play word association and said, Tim, air war, World War I, first words out of my mouth would be Red Baron. And maybe Snoopy after that, but, because all of us here in the U.S., let's face it, we grew up with that, right? But the air superiority is huge in this game, because if you have air superiority level 1, then you get to re-roll all your barrage dice once, and you don't have to worry about friendly fire. That's massive. And then if you get up to level 2, you get all that, plus your opponent doesn't get to re-roll any of his 6 dice. So if your opponent has a barrage card with a value of 6, and let's say for argument's sake he rolls 4 6s, normally you'd be like, dude, I get to roll 4 more dice. Please try again. So that's huge. Now, again, it's been a long time since I read The Price of Glory, so I don't remember exactly how much was detailed about the air war, but that seems awfully heavy and seems to be a very big advantage in the game. And the Germans seem to be able to get that upper hand early, and if you push the air superiority track to +2 on your side, from what I've experienced here in my 5 games, it's hard to bring it back. So, is that historically accurate? It could be. Because again, I don't have the knowledge base, but I pointed out as one of the bad things, just in case if I, if I am right or if I'm wrong, can adjust and fix that. But for those of you who are more into World War I, and of course you all know, I'm sure you all remember my video about my review of Ostkrieg, which came out earlier this year. There was details about that drove me completely BSC. Okay, and the B is bat and the C is crazy, and I'm sure you all can guess the S. It just drove me to distraction. It was like watching that TNT series about Rome some years ago when they had Cato the younger addressing Sulla on the floor of the Senate. I'm like, no, that's not possible. It's stuff like that drives people to distraction. So I mention this because it doesn't influence things that badly for me, obviously, because I've played this game now 5 times and I've had it a week, so that kind of tells you my opinion of it right off the bat there. Actions speak louder than words kind of thing. But at the same time, I do wonder about that because it does seem like such a huge advantage. Okay, which takes me to another point I have in my bad column, which is the victory points for the U.S. Level of involvement, or U.S. Entry. Let me get the exact words here. Yeah, U.S. entry into the Great War. So at the end of the game, if the entry level is 0, the Germans get 15 points added to their score. Now, for the Germans to win the game at the end, they only need 0 or better. The French track, the French side of the track, only goes up to -15. So that means, and it can't go farther, and the French don't get an automatic victory if you push it to -15. So that means that theoretically, at the end of the game, the French could have that track pushed all the way back to -15. The Germans could be getting their dupas kicked from here back to Berlin, and if the U.S. entry level is at 0, it brings it back, gives the Germans 15 points, which takes it back to 0, and they win the game. Yeah, that seems a little, steep. Now, granted, since you can pick a card, you can discard cards and stuff, yeah, I mean, you should be able to increase the U.S. entry level, but at the same time, since the Germans can win an automatic victory by capturing those red star spaces, or Verdun itself, or pushing it to 50, they've got several options, you kind of have to weigh that. Do I have time to do that? Do I have the ability to discard extra cards to give me those die roll modifiers, especially if the Germans don't play the submarine card? So far, I haven't had an opportunity, or I should say a situation, where it's really been advantageous for them to do that. I mean, I could see where the timing of it could be really good at some point. You're rolling along as the Germans, you play one of those cards, even one of the ones that the French have to get to choose which cards to discard, but you give the modifier for the U.S. entry die roll. You don't have to, though, in my opinion. You can sit tight unless you think you're about to get an automatic victory, or you desperately need it because the French are striking back and you want to try and slow them down. So that just seemed kind of steep to me. And again, perhaps I'm wrong. I don't know enough about all the U.S. diplomatic ins and outs before they entered the Great War, but it just, from game terms, it seems a little steep to have a situation where, oh, you know what, it gives the other side 15 points and your track can only go to 15 on your side, so I can win just by making sure that you never get that level up. So I just thought that was a little steep. The other thing I put in the bad column was there is a player aid card for the game, but the only thing it has is the event tables and the U.S. entry. A game like this, especially since there's some different takes and different approaches. I think really needs another player aid card that goes over the sequence of play, has, you know, like you see in other games, has the combat broken down, things like that. I really think that would help, because I spent a lot of time the first 2 plays flipping through the rulebook, and I still kind of look at the rulebook for the sequence of play. Now, granted, you can make that pretty quick, but, you know, quite frankly, given the price that you pay for this game, and I don't feel, what's the word I want? I don't feel ripped off or anything for what I paid for this game. But at the same time, for what you pay for it, I think those cards should exist to make things easier and smoother for the players. So my bad column there has got, what do we got here? We got 4 things. So, you know, 14 to 4. Let's see, what is that? Roughly 4 to 1 ratio. So not bad. All right. Now the ugly. I don't have too much with the ugly. I really only have 2 things. And I will say the one ugly thing, I need to continue to do some more plays to see exactly how it works out. Because it seems like... I'll tell you what, I'll get into it here in a second. Let's just do it that way. So let's just start there. There's a couple cards in the game that allow you, as one of the players, to put down an extra victory point marker on an enemy controlled space. Okay, so like for the Germans, you could put one down. Say like you play the card and you're like, oh dude, you know what, I know I'm going to be able to capture this space next turn, so let me put that bugger there, and then I can add that extra victory point there. You could do that, I mean, over here, you know, if either side is not really, you know, doing much movement on one flank or the other, which to me just seems like a quick, easy victory point. And victory points are hard to come by in this game. You know, if you saw the playthrough video, you know it takes a lot of effort to get those victory points. So, I don't know, just the ability to put it in any enemy-controlled space, it does make me wonder a little bit. I mean, it kind of then feels almost a little bit too like the international relations theory of constructivism, which basically says that, you know, all the flashpoints, all the problems, all the issues between countries are social constructions. So, for example, very briefly, very quickly, do a little divergence here. But like West Berlin, you know, West Berlin had no intrinsic value, you know, to speak of. You know, there was no resources, there was, you know, no access, blah, blah, blah. But because of what the importance both sides put on it, from a social standpoint, constructed-wise, it became such a huge, huge part of the Cold War. And it feels that way a little bit with these VP markers. You know, like the forts and stuff, you know, that's what happened. But to put down a victory point marker in a zone that's controlled, you know, by the enemy, that's kind of like away from the action, or in the middle of BFE, if you will, as far as, you know, combat and focus and stuff goes, that just seems a little odd to me. Now, granted, you could argue that, well, by doing that, then the other side can bring in their reinforcements and you both can fight over it. But again, that brings back to the point of, should you be fighting over it? I mean, if you put it down on, you know, this space over here, which is just, you know, a green space, there's no intrinsic value to it, there's no fort, there's no victory points or anything else about it, does that really make sense? So, that's one of the ugly things. The other ugly thing, and this might be a big thing for some of you, since I play solo, it's not such a big deal, but the other ugly thing I would say is that, and again, now this is based on solo observations so far, I'm not sure how it will go with a 2-player game. I would assume it goes faster, but on average, every month that I have, month turn I do, it takes me about 30 minutes to play both sides total, combined. Now that includes, you know, choosing your cards, reshuffling your decks, blah, blah, blah. But still, you're talking about 5 turns where there's 2 months each time. And then 1 turn where there's 1 month. So we're talking 11 months altogether. So, let's see, math was never my strong point here. So half of that would roughly be, so you're talking about like 5 hours to play the game. That's a lot. Now, if you have a designated space, a man cave fortress like I have, you can just leave it set up and you don't have to worry about pets, children, and any other random barbarian tribes that might show up and disrupt things. But if you don't have that kind of space, if you don't have that kind of buffer, so to speak, that can make things a little difficult. And again, I assume in a two-player game it would go faster. But how much faster, I don't know. The box, let me see if the box says. One thing I forgot to check on here was what the box says for the length of the game. It says playing time 1 to 4 hours. So I guess that's only an extra hour, but, you know, depending on how your life is and what your gaming time is, you know, that can be significant, that extra hour it takes you to play. So that's with my ugly column. That's only 2 things there. So, again, so good to bad, we've got basically a, 3-to-1 ratio, right? 4 bad to 14. Yeah, 3-to-1 ratio, which of course, as we all know, is the magic ratio from the old SPI Avalon Hill days, right? If you want to do an amphibious assault, you got to have 3-to-1, baby. And of course, it's 7-to-1 when you compare good to ugly. And even if you add ugly and bad together, which would be 6, you're still talking 2-to-1, which is nice odds to have, right? So, one other thing I'll mention is the solo rules that are under development. If you're a solo player primarily like I am, you might want to check it out. I've glanced at them. I haven't done much with them yet because I'm not a big fan of solo rules with bots, with flowcharts of if this, then that. If A, then go to B, and if B, then go to C, and if C, then maybe D, but possibly E. I don't know. I find that a little cumbersome. It's just my own personal opinion. But, so I haven't really looked at that yet. I probably will at some point. Once I burn myself out on this first go here, which I'm not so sure. It's been a week. And I still feel like even when I finish this game, I want to go one more time with this. So I guess that kind of says a lot right there, right? I'm playing on my own for the most part. And again, with the time factor, there are 2 shorter scenarios. There's a 2-turn scenario that just covers the initial German onslaught, and then there's one that runs, I want to say, let's see, hold on a second, let me just find a scenario here real quick in the scenario book. La la la, some scenario looking music. That runs 5 turns, okay, instead of the full game, which by turns it's only turns 5 and 6. My apologies, I misread this at first. So it's kind of like there's 2 scenarios with a couple of turns on the front end, turns on the back end, and then you of course got the big enchilada, the piece de resistance of the big scenario. Okay, so in the end, I really enjoy this game. This might be my favorite game on World War I that I have ever laid eyes on. Now, before all you passive glory people start screaming at the screen being like, what? Have you lost your ever-loving mind? That's FUBAR. I will say passive glory sits on my shelf. It sits, well, you know what? I'm just going to show you. Because I don't usually show much of my man cave because my man cave is a natural disaster. But there it is. Way up there at the top. Right under Minutes to Midnight and Hitler's Right. But it's there. It's been there for a long time. And I'm not sure how much longer it'll be there. Maybe not much longer. Maybe this will be the time that I finally pull it out. But of the games I have played, let's put it that way, this is definitely now is number 1 on my World War I list. And as you all know, at the end of the year, I always do my best and worst new to me for the year. And I got to tell you right now, here we are halfway through the year basically. And what a year, right? This is in my top 3 probably for best of the year at this point in time. I've just enjoyed this game that much. So if you're interested in Verdun, I definitely recommend this. I have another game about Verdun. I should take that back. I have 2 games about Verdun. I have that one of S&T that also did, it escapes me right now, because again, my World War I knowledge is not as good as some of my other knowledge. At the beginning, not the beginning maybe, but at some other point in the World War, there was a fortress over on the Eastern Front. That escapes me, I can't remember. But anyway, there was that S&T issue, like the high 190s, I think. It was somewhere in there. And then I had the, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, I have a Avalanche Press game. It's a Verdun game, but this replaces both of those. I won't ever touch either one of those again, so, it's time to time to tell those games you ain't got to go home, but you got to get the hell out of here. So, because I don't need them anymore, so to speak. This game has been that much fun, and I can see this game coming out, quite a few times. I'll be curious to see what my wife thinks, because my wife told me she'd play any game that I wanted for Father's Day, and that still is out there because this showed up just before Father's Day. So I'm kind of curious to see what she thinks about it. From a non-wargamer perspective, I'll be very curious to see. But she likes Twilight Struggle. She likes the card-driven games, so we'll see. So, in the end, despite some of the little blemishes, and again, some of these blemishes, I could be wrong about when it comes to the history, like the U.S. diplomacy and the air superiority. But some of them are really things that could easily be adjusted for future, like second edition, if this, sells well enough and stuff. Or, of course, future games also produced by this same company. Overall, I'm very, very pleased, very, very impressed. I'm glad I managed to stumble across this one, because this has definitely been worth the time, the effort, and quite frankly, the money, too. And I said it before, and I'll say it again very quickly, that the artwork, I was so moved by the artwork. And again, art is just a medium that usually doesn't move me very much. But, I got, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right now, Tardi. I got his 2 books, his 2 graphic novels that he did. I ordered them the other day, and I'm looking forward to reading them. It's just, there's so many different elements to this game that make it such a good game, such a fun game, such an interesting game. And like I said, this is my 5th play, and I'm not bored. I'm still discovering, little card combos, and, depending on what you have in your hand, and, how can you kind of like piggyback them together, and best way to use your barrage cards, and, just when you think you can unleash those 2 barrage cards in one space, there's a counter battery fire, and it's just a lot going on here in what, relatively speaking to other war games, is a very simple structure that it's just awesome. It's just mind-blowing, and I thoroughly enjoy it, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in World War One, or at least if you're interested in World War One with the knowledge level that I have. But again, what I know of it, I think this game does a good job with the history, with the exception of those 2 things I already pointed out. So there you have it. This game definitely gets 2 thumbs up from Bare Bones Wargaming, and maybe even we'll just, even a little extra pizzazz, if you will. A little extra moxie thrown in there, too. Okay, so next time, I'll be honest with you, the next video, I haven't got a clue. I have no idea. Yeah, I have no idea what game I'm going to highlight. I will tell you this, it won't be Paths of Glory, because even if I start playing that, there has been so much analysis and so much discussion on that game and the intensity level that I wouldn't make a video, because I'm sure it would be extremely amateurish and quite frankly superfluous, because my point is to show people how the game works and plays, and I'm sure there's lots of other videos out there that are done by people with a huge amount of knowledge of play of the game and or the history that, again, superfluous is the best word to describe, if I made a video, how that would be viewed in terms of the body of work that exists out there in the world on Paths of Glory. So it definitely will not be that. But supposedly the Napoleon 1807 game is supposed to be shipping sometime in the near future. Who knows, maybe it'll be that one. I've been kind of steered away from World War II here for a while. Those of you who watched my channel for the last couple of years know I'm usually big on that, but eventually you get tired of everything and you kind of rotate around. So I'm kind of rotating right now at this point in time. So it could be another American Civil War game too, because I have some other things on my shelf that I've been looking at. So we shall see. Anyway, again, 2 thumbs up for this game on several different levels. This game has been a very good game and quite frankly one of my best purchases thus far this year. So on that happy note, this is Tim Korchmar from Bare Bones Wargaming saying thanks for watching, and I will see you again from somewhere. There's a place for us. Okay, enough West Side Story, right? Alright, as always, thanks for watching. See you again next time.